So how does a country actually achieve rapid economic growth? And maybe more importantly, how does it make that growth last? To dig into this, we're going to look at the story of Ethiopia, one of Africa's most dynamic and also most challenged economies. Its recent history gives us a really powerful way to understand the fundamental drivers of economic development.
For more than a decade, starting around 2004, Ethiopia was a true global standout. The country managed to sustain an average GDP growth rate of about 10% a year. I mean, think about that. That made it one of the fastest growing economies on the entire planet and really symbolized an incredible economic turnaround.
But here's the thing. That impressive momentum didn't last. Even before the global shocks we've seen recently, Ethiopia's growth was already starting to slow down. And that slowdown suggests that whatever was driving its initial success was kind of reaching its limit, exposing some deeper structural issues in the economy.
So this brings us to the big question, right? What does it take to not just start economic growth, but to sustain it for the long haul? Well, we're going to break down Ethiopia's experience using a framework of 4 key factors, or capitals, to try and find some answers. Okay, let's start with the first source of growth, natural capital. This is all about the natural resources a country is born with and how it can use them for economic activity. To put it simply, natural capital is the stock of a country's natural assets. You know, its land, its water, its forests, and its minerals. For a country like Ethiopia, which is rich with fertile land and powerful rivers, this capital is really the essential foundation for its development.
And a perfect example of this is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or the GERD as it's known. This is a massive hydroelectric project on the Blue Nile. It's a huge strategic investment designed to turn the power of water into reliable electricity, which can then power industry and even generate revenue from exports.
But relying on natural capital has some pretty significant challenges. The economy is still heavily dependent on agriculture that relies on rainfall, which makes it extremely vulnerable to climate change and unpredictable weather. On top of that, a huge portion of the country's workforce is tied up in that one sector, and the massive upfront costs of things like irrigation systems have made it tough to fully use all of its water resources.
So, natural resources are crucial, but they're really only as valuable as the people who can use them. This brings us to our second factor, human capital. This is all about the collective health, skills, and education of a nation's people.
Human capital isn't just about how many workers you have. It's about their quality, the economic value that comes from their skills and their experience. And you build this through really important investments in things like education, healthcare, and job training. And you've got to give credit where it's due. Ethiopia has made huge progress here. Over the last couple of decades, public investment has led to some dramatic improvements. Life expectancy has jumped up, infant mortality has dropped, and access to education has expanded in a big way. The expected years a child would spend in school literally doubled in just over a decade. But here's where we see a crucial gap between access and quality. So, despite all those gains, Ethiopia's human capital score is still pretty low compared to its regional neighbors like Kenya and Rwanda. This really highlights a major challenge. It's one thing to get kids into classrooms, it's another thing to make sure they're getting a high-quality education that gives them productive skills.
And this quality gap isn't just an abstract problem. It has real-world consequences. Businesses in Ethiopia consistently say there's a mismatch between the skills they need and the skills they find in the workforce. We're talking about gaps in technical skills, work ethic, and even basic literacy. And all of that really holds back competitiveness and productivity.
So that brings us to our third area of focus, physical capital. These are the man-made tools, machines, and all the infrastructure that actually enables production. So physical capital is basically all the man-made stuff that makes an economy go. Think about the roads and railways that move goods, the factories that make them, and the communication networks that connect everybody.
And this right here has been the absolute centerpiece of Ethiopia's growth model. A massive state-led investment campaign has dramatically expanded the country's infrastructure. The road network has quadrupled, and the government has built over 20 industrial parks, all designed to attract manufacturing investment. This quote from The Economist really paints a picture of that strategy in action. Foreign direct investment, especially from Chinese companies, has been a key part of getting these industrial zones up and running. They've become these hubs for manufacturing things like textiles and shoes, and in the process have created thousands of jobs. But, as you can probably guess, this investment-heavy model has created its own set of problems. All that massive public spending has led to a sharp increase in external debt. Transport costs are still high,
Businesses are held back by an unreliable power supply, and a lot of these ambitious industrial parks are still unfinished or don't have all the essential services they need.
Okay, finally, we get to our fourth factor, institutional change. Now, this one's a little more abstract. It refers to the rules of the game that govern an economy, both the formal laws and the informal social norms.
So, when economists talk about institutions, they mean the systems and structures that shape how people interact. This covers everything from the quality of the legal system and how secure property rights are, to how effective the government is and how well it controls corruption. Basically, strong institutions create a predictable and fair environment for businesses and investors.
And this is where we find a really significant roadblock to Ethiopia's growth. As you can see, its score for institutional quality is noticeably lower than its regional competitors. Things like weak regulations and inconsistent policies create an unpredictable environment, and that really hinders development.
So here's the crucial point. The state-dominated growth model, the very thing that was so effective at building infrastructure, has also created major challenges for the private sector. When the government and state-owned companies borrow so much money, it makes it really hard for private businesses to get the loans they need. Economists call this crowding out, and it really stifles entrepreneurship and private investment.
All right, so we've looked at these four capitals. What's the path forward for Ethiopia? How does it move from its recent past to a future that's more sustainable?
Well, we can kind of frame the choice as one between two different models. Ethiopia's growth so far has been a story of capital accumulation, just building more stuff. And that can give you really rapid initial gains, but eventually you hit a point of diminishing returns, and you're stuck with a lot of debt. The other path is growth through structural transformation. This is driven by becoming more productive, encouraging innovation, and shifting the whole economy into more complex, higher-value industries. That's the path to long-term sustainable prosperity.
And this leaves us with a final, critical question. Ethiopia has made these enormous investments in its physical, human, and natural capital. The challenge now is whether it can make the deep institutional reforms needed to actually unlock the potential of those investments. Its future really depends on shifting from a model of simply building things to one of true economic transformation. Thanks for joining this Explain.